Welcome to our podcast, If You Could Hi to Kolob. My name's Daniel and this is Clive.
Hello and welcome.
Clive, loads of people have been asking us why we call the podcast If You Could Hi to Kolob, so why don't you start off by clearing that up?
Well, I mean, it's a hymn that we both really love. It's a very interesting hymn as well. The doctrines that the hymn talks about, it's just fascinating, and things like that are the things that we want to talk about in future episodes of this podcast.
Absolutely. So, for everyone listening, welcome. We appreciate you joining us. Clive and I have been passionately studying the gospel for a long time now from a historical and a spiritual perspective.
Well, yeah, that's right. I mean, we're brothers, so we were born in this church and grew up together in it. Through the years, we've taught many lessons from gospel doctrine, elders quorum, institute, lessons as missionaries as well.
That's right. And now, well, neither of us have those callings anymore. We're both doing other things. And we were having some conversations about how we can keep up our study. And sometimes you need a bit of a purpose. And that's how this podcast was born.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of people, me included, feel like when you teach, that's when you learn the most, So for us, yeah, like I said, we study all the time and we do talk about things like this. And we, hoping that the things that we study of the Come Follow Me program for next year that we put into this podcast, the insights and the things that we've learned, hopefully we can help everybody else out too with their teachings. Something I do want to mention though as well is, and each week I'll mention that anything that we talk about on the podcast, we're going to gather all the references and put them on the website. So anything you hear today, you're not sure about, you want to get some clarification of, jump onto the website and you'll be able to see all the references there. And hopefully this will help you out with the things you want to teach as well.
Great. Okay, well, if you weren't aware already, 2024 Come Follow Me is about the Book of Mormon. It's going to be a great year. The Bible is done now, and so yeah, we've got the Book of Mormon, and then the year after we'll move on to the Doctrine and Covenants. So we've got a great year ahead. Every week we'll release an episode covering the lesson, and we'll always try to stay a couple of weeks ahead as well. We only do Sunday school every couple of weeks, and some people study in every second week, and some people can keep up every week, but certainly we'll have an episode covering every single week, and we'll release that well in time to keep up with your schedule. So, what
Yeah,
are we
definitely.
doing today?
Well, today is lesson 1, so that's the introductory pages of the Book of Mormon.
Awesome. Well, as we looked at this, Clive, I'm in a bit of a struggle because the first question to me in terms of the introductory of the Book of Mormon, it really goes way back. And the question I've got is how the Smiths ended up in the area. But I'm not really sure where does that start and where does that end and where does that cross over with Joseph Smith history and where does that leave us when we actually look at Joseph Smith history in 2025?
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, when I'm studying trying to figure out lessons, sometimes I'll get sidetracked on something that I find interesting and go off on a tangent on that, and it's got nothing to do with the lesson. But I mean, it's certainly no coincidence that the Smiths ended up where they ended up. But like I said, there's so many stories that lead to it, and so many things that worked in place that the Lord had put in place for the Smiths to end up where they were. But before we get into any of that, do you have a quote to start us off?
Yes, I do have today's quote. This is Gordon B. Hinckley from a general conference in October way back in 1998. And I feel like it goes perfectly in hand with the introduction of the Book of Mormon and how all that came to be. And it says, "Our entire case as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints rests on the validity of this glorious first vision. It was the parting of the curtain to open the dispensation of the fullness of times. Nothing on which we base our doctrine, nothing we teach, nothing we live by, is of greater importance than this initial declaration. I submit that if Joseph Smith talked with God the Father and his beloved Son, then all else of which he spoke is true. This is the hinge on which turns the gate that leads to the path of salvation and eternal life."
Well, see, that's a great lesson to kick off our podcast. Where are we starting then, Daniel?
So we are going to start with a little bit of an introductory on the Smiths, but very, very short, and we will cover this perhaps in its own podcast, in its own episode, it definitely needs more time than what we've got, and we really want to make sure we focus on the introductory of the Book of Mormon. So what I will just say is that Joseph Smith Sr. and Lucy Mack Smith, they had a whole bunch of events that led to them moving to Palmyra, and it was a really sometimes a very spiritual experience, and sometimes it was just downright difficult. Joseph Smith Sr. and Lucy Mack Smith, as a married couple, had loads of ups and downs. At one point had some money and had a store, at another point didn't, at another point were kicked out, at another point had a business venture, at another point they didn't. So in the end, they end up in Palmyra, and we will take our podcast today from that stage. We'll assume that they're already in Palmyra, and perhaps later on in the future we'll get to go through the history, because it is really, really interesting. So let's assume we're already in Palmyra, and the Smiths are in a place where there's preachers, there's a lot of excitement around. And I actually wanted to put this question to you first, though, Clive. In Palmyra, we're going to talk about George Lane in a minute, but I was hoping you might actually just give us a bit of, from a religious perspective, what would the lay of the land have been like with the Smiths when they moved into the area?
Well, it's interesting because by the time the Smiths got there, there'd already been this what's called the Second Great Awakening, which actually started around 1790-ish, and it went to about 1850, and the Smiths ended up there right in the middle of that. And this Second Great Awakening was a religious revival, is what they call it. It's where many, many religions came to be. They set up these huge tents where they would preach, not just to random strangers, but to thousands of people that have in their congregation. But they'd be out, they'd just have these big tents on the streets, and they'd be out preaching the gospel. And everyone's obviously got their own religions, their own sects, Presbyterian, Baptists, Calvinists, things like that. But yeah, I mean, this was the time that the Smiths got there, and this excitement was in the air, this Second Great Awakening.
So lots of religions are around. The Second Great Awakening, so had they just had a First Great Awakening, or was that way, way, way before, nothing to do with this one?
There was a First Great Awakening, it started around the early 1700s. Right. It was really more of a fear-mongering thing, though. It was, do this or you go to hell.
So I guess that's more of the traditional religion that we see from hundreds of years ago.
Exactly, all those
heaven or
historical
hell
type. Exactly,
right.
Exactly. Which, I mean, wasn't too different to what others were preaching, but it was sort of, this First Great Awakening kind of stopped at the American Revolution.
Okay.
When America became independent, and that's what sort of kicked off the Second Great Awakening, because once all that was over, America was its own independent country. Then it was one of the very few countries that was able to practice religious freedom. So a lot of people came over for that particular reason. Again, no coincidence. The Lord's got his hand in everything. But this is when the Smiths came in, right in the middle of all of this happening.
Okay. Well, that leads perfectly into then what I actually wanted to talk about, and that was about George Lane. So there's a guy called Reverend George Lane, and he, amongst most, is credited for actually telling Joseph Smith to read James 1:5. So the Smiths are in Palmyra. There's the Second Great Awakening. There's lots of religion happening, and I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that if I go to a town, I mean, how busy would it have been? Would it have been on every street there was someone, or is it every suburb there was a preacher? Would it have been chockers?
It seems like everything that I read, it seems like you can't turn a corner without somebody else preaching to you, or at least without the whole town going, hey, this is the guy that we go to because he's the one that preaches to us. You know, Joseph Smith's parents, obviously, they had their own ideas as well. Lucy was Presbyterian. That was her thing, at least for a while, but then that obviously changed.
The Smiths are in Palmyra, and they for some reason, they listen to Reverend George Lane. So I'm imagining there's a lot. For some reason, they've chose George Lane as the one to listen to. And he's preaching, and he actually tells them that they should ask God. They should ask God what to do. And he tells them to read James 1:5, and he says that he actually has a sermon called What Church to Join. And we got this information because William, Joseph's brother, later in life, he records and he says this: Reverend Mr. Lane of the Methodist preached a sermon on what church shall I join? And the burden of his discourse was to ask God, using as a text, if any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who giveth to all men liberally. And of course, when Joseph went home and was looking over the text, he was impressed to do just what the preacher had said, and going out in the woods with childlike, simple, trusting faith, believing that God meant just what he said, kneeled down and prayed. So Joseph and family, Joseph and co, listened to George Lane.
See, that's funny because I don't think that was a crazy coincidence that the sermon, what'd you say it was called again? What Church to Join?
The sermon was called What Church Shall I Join?
Because in 1811, Lucy says about Joseph Smith Sr. that my husband's mind became excited on the subject of religion, yet he would not subscribe to any particular system of faith, but contended for the ancient order as established by the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ and his apostles.
Right.
So, he went, hold on, I don't know if there's any religion that's right because they don't seem to follow the right order. So it's not crazy for them to not seek out, well, what religion is right. Yeah, I talked about how Lucy was Presbyterian. She went to a Presbyterian church one day. She said that one day she was going to go to a Presbyterian church because there was a devout man, is what they called him, preaching, and a lot of people actually came to that to listen to this devout man.
And what year was that?
Yeah, this was around 1811. Okay. So Joseph Smith was born, and this was still in the hype of that second Great Awakening, and everyone wanted to go and hear this devout man speak. They hadn't been there before, and she said that she wanted to go and listen to the Spirit from this devout man because she believed, and she's like, well, great, I want to listen to the Spirit. But it was interesting because after hearing him speak, she said, I returned home and was convinced that he neither understood nor appreciated the subject that he spoke. And she said, in her heart, there was not then upon the earth the religious that she sought. So it's interesting that this George Lane now has this sermon saying,
What church shall I join?
What church shall I join? Exactly.
Interesting. Okay, so Joseph goes home and he reads James 1:5, and he decides that he's going to do just that. He decides that he's going to speak to the Lord. He decides that he's got a prayer on his heart. In fact, he says that he was convicted of his sins, which is really, really interesting that he starts to feel these sort of things. And he said that here, this is from his 1832 journal. He says, I felt to mourn for my own sins and for the sins of the world, for I had learned in the scriptures that God was the same yesterday, today, and forever, that he was no respecter of persons, for he was God, for I looked upon the sun, the glorious luminary of the earth. And he goes on and on and on, the fowls of heaven, the fowls of heaven and the fish of the waters he talks about. So he needs to go and pray. And what I really like, and this shows the human side, is that Joseph doesn't just head out into the forest and decide to just head west or head east. He actually goes to somewhere specific, right? He goes to where he'd left an axe from where he was working probably the day before.
That's right, yeah, he was doing some clearing.
Right.
In these trees, and he knew that when he was there, it was a quiet place. So he decided, hey, that was a quiet place. I'll go there.
Familiar.
And he went to the place
familiar, I think, as
exactly.
well. He wasn't going to go
familiar.
get lost somewhere.
Exactly. It wasn't just, like I said, here's a good spot, let's give it a go. It was, this is the place that I'd known before. I'd actually left an axe in the tree stump. That seems like the perfect place for me.
Might go get the axe. And while I'm there, I'll say this prayer because I know there's no one else there. So he does so, and we know that we know that the adversary was having his moment. The adversary knew that at this point in time, it was now or never to take control of the situation and try absolute hardest to not let Joseph experience what he was about to experience, right? Joseph said he actually or he actually heard a physical presence behind him.
Yeah, that's right. He said, as I kneeled down to pray and said, "O Lord, what church shall I join?" He said his tongue swelled that he couldn't speak, and he heard footsteps behind him. Now, as we've said, it's an open clearing. Well, I mean, it's not fully open, but it's in the woods. He knows the area, and he knows that he wasn't followed. So suddenly he jumped up, and there was no one behind him, obviously. So then he tries again, but still with a swollen tongue, gets down, goes to pray, louder footsteps behind him, and it springs up, still can't find anyone. And like he said, suddenly he said that an unseen power seized upon him as he tried to speak, and his tongue was still bound, and the thick darkness closed around him.
Right. So he's actually he really is having a moment. He's really having a moment. And when I was looking at this part, I actually thought it was probably quite similar to Moses and what Moses experienced.
Well, yeah, Moses had seen God face to face, and then Satan came trying to trick Moses and say, I'm the son of God, worship me. And he's going, well, I've seen God face to face, and I don't feel the same that I feel with you. And Satan ranted upon the earth, and Moses said that he saw the bitterness of hell. And I couldn't imagine it being different to what Joseph Smith saw. A thick darkness. Joseph even said that he describes it as sinking into despair, overwhelmed by unbearable darkness, ready to abandon himself to destruction.
Unbearable and abandon is not super ideal.
They're not words that you make think, oh, it was pretty easy.
No.
Pretty easy to get out of it. So, yeah, I mean, it's very, very similar to Moses' story. And Joseph Smith, yeah, I mean, Satan didn't go, let me try and trick Joseph. He straight away just went, I've got to stop this.
Whatever's about to I feel like I know what's about to happen. I need to put an end to this now. I don't have time to waste. I need to physically stop this person.
Exactly. Such a panicky moment for Satan to go, this is the last dispensation. This is the
grand final. If I can stop this and make them lose the grand final, it's going to be great.
But we all know what happened after. Joseph mustered up his strength and cried out to the Lord, and suddenly this pillar of light appeared in front of him.
And what is this conversation that's about to happen? It is a conversation, and in church we obviously have Joseph Smith history, and that's great, and it gives us what we need to know. We don't. The detail of what happened is nothing pertaining to our salvation, but it is still amazingly interesting to learn about. So Joseph Smith history gives us a taste of what happened, but there really was a conversation. We know that, as I mentioned before, that Joseph felt convicted of his sins, and he records in his 1832 account, he actually records that he says here, and he spoke unto me, Joseph, my son, thy sins are forgiven thee, go thy way, walk in my statutes, and keep my commandments. Behold, I am the Lord of glory.
So that's different to other versions, though. Why was there so many different versions of the first vision, though?
Well, there was lots of other versions. In one version, we have one person coming down first, and then another person coming down second. We've got the traditional pictures, the traditional paintings that we see of both Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ with Joseph. I think it's more, I thought about that a lot over the years when I've taught this lesson, and I think it's more to do with Joseph's personal account. I think if I'm talking to you about something that's that's something really spiritual that happens to me, I'm going to give you quite a bit. But when I
compared to some guy at work,
or even compared to maybe a talk that I'm giving, and I want to share a spiritual experience, maybe in the talk I'll give 40% of actually what happened, and in Sunday school maybe I'd give 50% of what happened, but when I talk to you I might give 70 or 80%. I think something that happens to you so much, there's always going to be elements that you keep to yourself. I think there would be very few people on earth that you would tell absolutely everything to. Maybe you write it down, I guess, but I think that's how we don't need to know that the first thing said to Joseph was, thy sins are forgiven thee, go thy way, walk in my statutes. That has nothing to do with us getting to the celestial kingdom. What does have something to do with us getting to the celestial kingdom is that the first vision happened. So I think that when I think about the different versions, they're not, I don't know if they're different versions, they're snippets of the same event.
Just for what people need to hear at the time. You need to understand that no religion is right, and that's what I was told. You need to hear, hey, God came down and introduced his son, because then you know that this is true. I guess that's the sort of thing. So I suppose probably there hasn't been Joseph Smith and maybe Emma, his wife, are really the only two people that know exactly what happened. I imagine that there's some things that are so sacred to him, he probably hasn't even spoken to anybody about them, perhaps.
I definitely think so. I really, really think so. What he's written here, which I've got in front of me, is 1832 version. Yeah, there's a real decent paragraph here of what was said. And there's just no way that was everything. There's just no way on this planet that was everything. The heavens were open for the first time in a while, and it wasn't just a fleeting conversation and, hey, see you in 3 years, I'll send Angel Moroni. It was a big event, and it would have just been fantastic to be there. And maybe in the future we'll learn everything. Maybe. But to let everyone know, I guess what we're aware of, there's a couple of different events, a couple of different snippets of the one event. I'm gonna refer it as that now on. Hey, how about that? Snippets of the same event, not different versions. So we've got that Joseph records that one person comes down first and introduces the other. So we've got that. We've got our Joseph Smith history version. This is my beloved son. We've also got that Joseph said that he saw two glorious personages exactly resembled each other in features and likeness. We've got, like I've already mentioned, we've got Joseph, thy sins are forgiven thee, and then we've got this huge paragraph here as well. And then we've also got descriptions as well, which I thought I would bring up with you as well here. So in the 1832 version, Joseph says that he saw a pillar of fire above the brightness of the sun at noonday. But actually then he scribbles out the word fire and he writes the word light. So it says a pillar of light above the brightness of the sun at noonday. And I thought that was quite interesting. Joseph is still a human and he's still trying to describe these things, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. If you look at 1820, I mean, electricity was a thing, but people didn't have it in their homes. So for Joseph to describe what he saw, immediately he'd probably think it's fire, but it's not fire. I'd say sort of like Moses when he saw the burning bush. He describes it as a flame of fire in the midst of the bush. The bush burned with fire but wasn't consumed.
So did the bush have fire on it?
Well, exactly. It's the same sort of thing. This is so bright, and the only thing this bright I've ever seen is like fire. But it's not fire because it's not being consumed. And I guess it's the same with Joseph. So he's sort of gone, it's fire, not fire, actually. And I guess if we saw it now, we'd probably say it's brighter than a 100-watt bulb.
Sure. Is that bright these days? Brighter than the lights at the MCG.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Not that we live in Victoria. The other part, and I'm not sure that we're going to go into it now, but the other part is did Joseph go through a transfiguration process when this happened?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to look into. I mean, the scriptures do say that no man has seen God in the flesh except quickened in the spirit. But again, we don't want to go off on a separate tangent.
Let's keep it to the
Book
of Mormon introductory pages. Again, we should write that down and come back to that on another day.
That's right. Wave of Doctrine and Covenants. We'll get into all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. The first visions happened, and it's an absolutely miraculous event, and our entire religion is based on that event went as we've described it, which is...
That's right, exactly. This 14-year-old boy saw God in Jesus, and they explained to him that none of these religions that had suddenly popped up, none of them were right. So then, I guess, he went home, right? And did he tell his parents straight away, or
he did? He started telling people, and I wonder if he went back and told George Lane, his parents, of course. But I wonder if he went back and told George Lane, and I've thought about that quite a few times. I know that someone in George Lane's family did join the church, and I always wondered, did he go back and talk to George, Mr. Reverend George, and did he say, "Hey George, I did what you asked, and I saw God. Thanks for telling me to do this. Thanks for the advice." We know he went back and told people. We're aware of this story. We've heard it in church 400 times that he was ridiculed and he went back and he told people. But who are people? Like, it's easy to say, he went back and told some ministers. But I wonder if he went back and told George Lane and actually said, "George, I followed your sermon that you called 'What Church Should I Join?' and I was told to join none of them, not even yours. So, thanks."
That'd be an interesting conversation. Yeah. I couldn't imagine George Lane going, "Oh, okay, well, pull the tent down."
Yeah. Joseph did what I asked everyone, and hey, we're all wrong.
We're all wrong, yeah.
So, a really, really interesting time for Joseph. That I don't really want to go into it. We know what happened. He went through and he told people, and he was ridiculed for it. And it would have been a really challenging time for him. And anyone in their teenage years, anyone at all in their life, would have struggled with something like that. But that conversation, who did he talk to? Did he talk to George Lane? Something I'll keep thinking about, and who knows, maybe at some stage someone will flick me some journal entry or something that shows that
would
they
be
did.
Very, very interesting to read.
Yeah.
So,
and he lived a while, by the way, as well. George Lane didn't die until 1859. So
right. Wow.
he was around for a while, and I talk about him a lot. I bring him up in lessons whenever I'm teaching something like this, because he's really, I don't know, do I call him an unsung hero? But he's very unknown. But if all of these reports are true, and there's a number of them, it wasn't just William Smith who talked about it as well. There's multiple other people who talked about George Lane, and that Joseph, I think, later on talked about George Lane as well. So anyway,
it's one of those things. The Lord is working through someone else for something else to come about. So even if he never joined our church, he's still an important part of our church history.
Yeah, that's probably the right way to put it. Massively important to our history. And unknown, but that's okay. There's probably 400 other things that I've got no idea about either.
Yeah, hopefully we come across them.
Yeah. Okay, so he's gone back. He's been ridiculed, and years go by.
That's right, years go by, exactly. At the 3-year mark where he sort of picks up his story, he says that he was lying there in bed in his mind thinking, nothing else has happened because I haven't been righteous enough, and I need to pray to God and ask for his forgiveness for the things that I've done. So, I mean, after something so amazing, and then to go, hold on, I'm not, worthy enough. So he's lying in bed and he's praying to the Lord and he's asking for forgiveness and what he should do next. And suddenly, this conduit, he explains it, opens up from heaven and comes through it, this angel, this glorious being, and the whole room lights up.
Right.
Now, this room wasn't Joseph Smith's own room, I understand. It was quite small, I believe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, they lived in tiny, they were building things. They were building houses, and they didn't have a five-bedder, 3-bathroom scenario, that's for sure.
Yeah, so, I mean, he was sharing this room with his siblings, right. And this glorious being appeared. The whole room lit up, but nobody else seemed to wake up, and this angel came down and introduced himself.
Maybe that's a future episode. Why did that happen?
So Moroni's there, and he introduced himself. He says that he's Moroni, and he explains. Well, he talks about quite a few things, but he talks about the Book of Mormon and Joseph's important role in bringing about the Book of Mormon. And an angelic visit like that. Suddenly he disappears back, opened up conduit back into space. The light gathers back around and he goes up, and Joseph's just lying there going, wow, what an amazing thing. If that was me, I'd be lying there going, all right, what did he say again?
Yeah, anyone got some parchment and a quill? Anyone got a quill and some ink? And
So he's just lying there, in his own head going, okay, what an amazing thing. This has happened again. And I've got to get this Book of Mormon. Suddenly, the conduit again appears, and the angel Moroni appears again, and he says the exact same thing that he had said before, except a little bit at the end he does change, which we'll get into a lot more detail when we talk about Joseph Smith history. But the important part of what we're talking about is he tells him about the Book of Mormon and the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. Then again he leaves, and Joseph's there just to lie there going, wow,
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, again.
You know?
Thank goodness I forgot the first one.
Yeah. I think I got the most of it now. But then again, conduit opens up from the heavens and comes through this angel Moroni and says the same thing again. Again, a little bit differs, and he does warn Joseph this time that Satan will try and tempt him, and other people will try and tempt him and try and take away the plates, and it's up to him to protect them. Actually, the last thing he does say is to tell his father about this, because he will believe him, which is interesting because Joseph doesn't immediately tell his father because he's really worried about telling him because he doesn't think that he's going to believe him. You know, it's been 3 years since God the Father and Jesus visited him.
So do you think he...
And nothing since.
So I wonder what... No, I honestly don't know, but I wonder if Joseph was... You know, he talked about seeing the first vision, and years had gone by. Do you think he might have been like, hey, if I tell people that this has happened now 3.5 years later, or hey, they thought God would have visited me already, and kind of everyone just thinks I've got no idea anymore, or I'm not sure what would have been going through his head.
I'm not sure. It's interesting because the day before this happened, Joseph was helping his neighbor dig a well, and when they were digging the well, he found this stone that is a seer stone. Now Joseph knew it was a seer stone because back then it wasn't a rare thing. It was just impossible for anyone to actually use it properly. And so I wonder if Joseph in his mind is going, I've got this and everyone knows I've got this, and it's going to be hard for them to convince them that, hey, just so happens after this happened, after I found that amazing stone, also an angel appeared to me. I wonder, because it had been 3 years and it'd be hard to say, hey, no, I swear 2 years ago this still happened. Hey, 3 years ago this happened. So I don't know what's going through his head, but it couldn't have been anything going, hey, yes, everyone's going to believe me all of a sudden.
Yeah, and to think about the ridicule that he would have gone through before, all of that, it's easy to read stories in a book, but when you think about the mental challenge that these people actually go through, like it adds a bit of a different dynamic to their decision making, and then what we read afterwards. We're not in their situation. It's easy to read and go, oh, you've just seen an angel. Of course go tell your father. What do you mean? But what he had gone through over the last few years would have been a proper challenge, I think.
Oh, I agree. I mean, yeah, you're right. It's easy to say, hey, you could have been good for 3 years. But even when you read the Book of Mormon and the Nephites and Lamanites, they're good for 100 years and they're bad again. You go, oh,
yeah.
You're only good for 100 years.
Easy for me to say, hey, was I sin-free today?
That's right, exactly.
A story for another day.
So, as soon as Moroni leaves, it's morning.
Right.
So Joseph's obviously exhausted.
Yeah, absolutely. So he's absolutely wrecked. He'd essentially just been up all night. So the angels, he's got lots on his mind, but he's still got to go to work. He's still got to go out into the farm, and he still has to perform his day labours. He's older now, and he's certainly a part of the family, and he's certainly a big part of the economy of the family as well. He's not a young boy anymore. He absolutely has to pull his weight around the farm. We kind of touched on the Smiths' economic position at the start, but they didn't have much money and they all had to work and work and work. So Joseph has no choice but to go out and begin his jobs. But his family, I think it was Alvin, right? Alvin in particular notices him and realizes that he's probably not up to himself, and his father sends him back. And his father, he's basically told, you're essentially useless for us for the day. There's obviously something going on. Head back home and get some rest. And he goes to climb over a fence and falls backwards. And Moroni comes back again.
That's right, exactly. Comes back again. This time, I mean, Joseph said that he's unconscious. Moroni comes to him in his mind, says the same thing. And then at the end, he does say...
Go and tell your father.
go and tell your father. And just said, but will he believe me? And Moroni says, he will. So Joseph Smith, as soon as he wakes up, that's it. I got to go tell my father exactly what happened.
Moroni is not in control of Joseph Smith Sr.'s actions, but I think Moroni has said that with confidence because Joseph Smith Sr.'s life has been good at times, down at times, good at times, down at times, and he's been seeking religion. He's not just... This isn't brand new to him. The idea of religion is not brand new to him. Joseph Smith Sr. is seeking something. He's seeking a higher purpose.
Of course. And, you got to think that he's probably been prepared as well for this particular day. So perhaps yesterday he wouldn't have been ready, and that's why Moroni hadn't visited Joseph yesterday, because Joseph Smith Sr. wasn't ready to hear it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But maybe today, today is the day that he will believe you and he will understand. Go and tell him and he will.
Yeah, everything in the right timing.
Exactly, the Lord's time.
Okay, so he hops up and he goes and tells his father, and that goes exactly to planned.
Yeah, exactly. His father goes, go exactly to where, the angel Moroni showed you in a vision where the plates are.
Go and do it.
Go and do it. So he goes straight there, he goes to the hill Cumorah, and he finds a big rock, moves the big rock, and he finds this stone box, and he sees the plates in there, and he reaches out to touch them. He thinks he's alone at this time, and he gets this pulse through him, and a shock. And
he does that a couple times, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. He reaches out three times. He does it, and then he cries out, "Why can't I obtain the book?" And Moroni is there, off to the side, and he says, "It's because you've not kept the commandments of the Lord." And he's shown in this vision the glory and power of God, and he's also shown Satan and the numberless hosts on one side, and the glory of God on the other.
Lesson.
And it's a lesson. And Moroni says, "Look, there's two powers here, and you should never be influenced by the wicked one." That's why Joseph wasn't ready to receive the plates. So he says, when can I come back? When can I have them? And he says, come back exactly 1 year from now. So the date was the 22nd of September, 1823. Right. So he's told to come back on the 22nd of September, 1824. And this time when you come, bring the right person with you. And Joseph says, who's the right person? He's your oldest brother.
Which his oldest living brother is, of course, Alvin.
Of course, that's right.
Who only survives another 2 months, I think, September, October, November. Only survives another 2 months after that event, right?
That's right. So after this had happened, Alvin dies 2 months later. So Joseph's obviously sad that Alvin's died, but also confused. Why was I told that the right person was Alvin when Alvin died? Was it for Alvin to know that he was, before he died, hey, you're the person that's supposed to come with me? Maybe it was for him. Maybe it was for Joseph.
Well, Alvin says to Joseph in the throes of death, he says to him that he needs to be an honest man and he needs to go and obtain the plates. Alvin's very aware of what's going on, and really, I don't know if he gets stuck into him, but he certainly makes it clear that Joseph should fix himself, get himself right, and get the plates.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, that could be for Joseph, for him to know, to understand.
Sure.
But Joseph does go back. He goes back the next year, as he does. Obviously, Alvin isn't with him, like he'd hoped. But he goes there and he speaks with the angel Moroni again. He removes the plates.
He actually
this time,
and by remove, we actually mean removed. He actually reached in, picked them up, moves over to the side, puts them down.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And Moroni says to him, he gives him strict instruction. All right, when you've got the plates, go straight home, take the plates, go straight home.
Don't let them out of your sight.
Don't take your focus off the plates.
Right.
Exactly. These are sacred texts. But Joseph, he puts them, probably thinking that he's doing the right thing, but he takes them out, puts them down. He sees in this box the Urim and Thummim and the brass plates. Now, in his mind, like you'd spoken about, he came from quite a poor family, and he's looking at it, not thinking, I want to sell these, but in his mind, he's thinking, I wonder if these are worth
Here's a
much.
flash. He
Yeah,
has a
exactly. And
flash in his mind of value, of monetary value.
he's only human. It's just a passing thought, most likely. But because this had happened, he turned back to where the plates were, and they were gone.
Right.
And he looked back, and they were back in the box. And Moroni said, you didn't follow the directions, so therefore you can't have them again. You got to come back in another year's time.
So we're up to 1825 now, right?
So this is 1825 would be the next year that he
Yep.
comes. Now, the things that I've studied, I can't seem to find what happens in 1825. There seems to be a bit of a gap in
In the record.
And I don't know if anybody listening knows what happened in 1825. There's a lot of things that you find online that aren't proven.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things you find online. So
We're trying to keep
Wikipedia
everything
it.
to reference based.
Exactly.
And a good
Anything
reference,
that we find
not
in church
The
doctrine.
Gospel according to Daniel, chapter
That's
1,
right.
verse 1.
That's right. Yeah. WikipediaMormon.org or anything like that. So if anybody were to find it, I'd be very interested in it. But we know that the last year that he went there, he was told by the angel Moroni. So we know that he got the plates in 1827.
Yeah.
So 1825, not 100% sure exactly what happened, but we know he didn't get them. But he went in 1826, and he was told that he actually can't get the plates this time. And this time it's because the people that he worked for were wicked people.
Right.
And so the reason that he couldn't get the plates is because the people that he worked for and the people that he was surrounded by were wicked people.
That's right. So essentially he was associating with people that were not conducive to a man who is a future prophet and a person who would carry themselves in a way that they can talk to angels. This is when we understand the treasure seeking days and those stories that I think some people are aware of, but again, some people are not aware of. I've got, I think this is a seminary manual I've got here in front of me from the year 2000. It was published, and it's certainly in there. And there was another book I had here somewhere that was even older, and it was in there as well. So I think that commentary around that quote unquote treasure seeking sort of shocks people. It's unfortunately, and this is my own opinion, unfortunately in the church we don't often share all the details of every story, and that might be good in some circumstances, but then when people learn about it in a very uncontrolled environment, it can become quite harmful. But certainly we're across it. Joseph Smith had some treasure seeking days, and he wasn't very good at it, right? Brigham Young said something about that.
Well, exactly. Someone asked Brigham Young straight up, they said, but Joseph Smith was a gold digger, wasn't he? And Brigham Young said, yeah, but he wasn't very good at it. It never made him rich. So, yeah, if you hear somebody say, hey, well, Joseph Smith was a gold digger, it's completely out of context.
Right. Was Joseph Smith a gold digger when he was when the Book of Mormon was being translated and he was having revelations? No, the answer is definitely no. When Joseph Smith was a young man, he had temptations like all of us do, and in this case, he was trying to seek out treasure. There's some stories about him using the seer stone that you mentioned. He had thoughts that he had some fleeting thoughts that if he could use the plates for another purpose, life for his family might be easy. And that was a challenge. Everyone's got their challenges. That was a challenge for him. And so the consequence of that challenge was, in 1826, he hoped that he could get the plates, I'm sure, but the angel Moroni was certainly not going to allow that to happen.
That's right, and I feel that he wasn't a bad guy at this time. It was just the people that he was surrounded by. He was told this time, when you come again next year, obviously, exact same time next year. And he was told again, bring somebody with you. bring the right person with you. And Joseph, well, okay, well, who's the right person? And all that he was told by Moroni is, you will know. So, that was something for him to ponder for the next year of who this right person it was. He prayed to God, and he saw in vision that the right person that he should bring with him was Emma, his wife.
So he heads up with Emma, and they're in a carriage, from memory. I should really have wrote this down, but I believe they're in a carriage, and he tells Emma to essentially wait. And I don't know if she waits at the bottom of the hill and he walks up, but he tells her that she can't go with him. So she waits, and he goes and he retrieves the plates, and Moroni still gives him some commentary, but Moroni essentially allows him to take the plates this time. And Joseph's married, and he's a mature man, or maturing man now, and I think he's 21 at the time, right? So he takes the plates and he hides them. He's really worried that he's being watched, and he's worried that the plates are going to be taken from him. So he hides them in a log and heads away and moves out of the area and then retrieves them. So he takes them home, and he said he's got them, and he says he's sitting around. There's an amazing story of him sitting around the kitchen table. And his mother says to him, Joseph, did you get the plates? Were you able to get the plates? And he says, I've got them, and they're magnificent. I think he says they're the most magnificent thing I've ever seen. And he's elated that he's able to get the plates. And in what must have just been a real moment for that family, to hear Joseph say that he's become worthy and that he's able to fulfill this crazy mission. And the family would have been in the throes of it as well, of what Joseph had gone through, and they believed him the whole time. They were beside him the whole time. And I've heard an interesting comment about Joseph, and that is that the people who believed Joseph the most were the people who were around him the most. People who knew him as a man, and people who knew of his character, they're the ones that believed him the most. So his family must have just been elated. That commentary that I talked about where they said, Joseph, did you get them? Did you get the plates? And he says, yes. What an incredible moment that would have been in history.
Of course. I mean, not only does Joseph have the faith that he's able to get the plates, but his family all around him having the faith that Joseph saw what he said he saw. He'll get the plates when he's ready to get the plates. We believe him, and we're patient.
Right.
And what an incredible time for everyone. But we know the story of Joseph translating the plates, but the witness is an interesting story. But before that, I believe Lucy, she didn't touch the plates for any particular reason, but didn't she have a story about the plates?
She had to move them around. So the plates at different times were in different places. So there's stories of the plates being hidden in a barrel of beans. There's stories of the plates going missing, and Joseph being, his carriage at one stage was under scrutiny, and then the plates had gone missing, and then this random stranger with a rucksack turns up and gives him the plates back and then disappears. But so the plates were in different places, and in the Smith family home, they were under a cloth, and they were on, I guess you would call it a mantelpiece, or sometimes they were on the table. And Lucy said that she had to move them from time to time. She would pick them up, and so she felt the weight of them. She knew the size of them, and she would move them. She would clean the area, and then she would put them back. So she was handling them. Certainly, there's no record of her moving the cloth out the way and going through it page by page, going, "What on earth do these characters mean?" But she definitely had to handle them. They were a item in their house, like you've got an item in your house. They were a thing that was in their home.
Yeah, wow, that's interesting. So let's get back into the introductory pages.
Have we started the actual lesson yet?
Well, we talked about the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, which is
that's kind of
a major part of the Book of Mormon section of the the lesson. But let's talk about the witnesses then. So there's the three witnesses, which are obviously Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Martin Harris. Now they got to see the plates themselves.
That's right. That's right. So the three witnesses, there's two sets of witnesses. There's the three witnesses. They have an angelic experience, and then there's the eight witnesses who get to see the plates. So out of the three witnesses, we have like you said, Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Martin Harris. And so how the witnessing occurred was that Joseph went with those three men, and they went off to pray together. They They've already received revelation, you see, in the Doctrine and Covenants, which says that they will be a witness by three. So they're aware of who it is, and so they go off to pray. And nothing's happening. Nothing's happening at all. Martin Harris feels really, really guilty. You'll remember that he convinced Joseph to take the Book of Lehi, and that goes missing. His wife Martin Harris's wife puts him under tons and tons of pressure to prove that the funding that Martin Harris had done for the quote unquote Mormonism movement was a real thing. And so eventually, and we'll talk about that more in Doctrine and Covenants, but essentially the Book of Lehi never comes back. And so Martin Harris is really feeling really, really guilty. Actually, in this seminary manual that I've got here, Religion 341 to 43, it says, except for Joseph Smith, no man played a more varied role in the coming forth of the Book of Mormon than Martin Harris. He provided financial support so the prophet could move from Manchester, New York to Harmony, Pennsylvania in December 1827, helping to fulfill an ancient prophecy. He also served as a scribe, and he became a witness. Financially assisted in its publication and testified of its truthfulness of the book throughout his life. So Martin Harris played an incredible role, but he's in this circle and he feels extreme guilt, and so he actually excuses himself. He actually doesn't want to be a part of it, or thinks he can't be a part of it. It's probably a better way to describe it. He thinks that he's not worthy and he excuses himself. And so when he does and he's out of sight, the angel Moroni comes down, has the plates, and gives an incredible angelic experience to Oliver and David. And the angel opens the leaves of the page and says that this book is the most correct book of any book on earth, and no man can get nearer to God. It's an incredible, absolutely incredible experience. So that all happens, and that's incredibly amazing. And the angel disappears. So Joseph now is wondering about Martin.
Yeah, well, Martin hasn't had that opportunity to see, but he is one of the witnesses. So
that's right. So, he goes and finds Martin, and Martin is still in the vicinity. Martin's still in the area. He hasn't hopped in a horse and taken off. He's still in the area. And Joseph joins him, and then they offer prayer together. When they do, and it's not hours, it's when they do, the angel Moroni comes down again and gives the exact same witnessing, if you like, to Martin. And so Martin is able to have the exact same experience as David and Oliver did, which would have just been incredible for him, who had been through such a challenging time. The story of the losing of the Book of Lehi is incredible, which we'll cover in the Doctrine and Covenants. But for Martin to have that, and for the faith that he showed, and for how he continued to show up for the prophet, is just absolutely remarkable. So that happens, and those three men go down in history as the three witnesses.
So, I mean, their testimony right there at the beginning, you should definitely give that a read yourself. It's quite incredible. But let's go to the eight witnesses now. So there's eight witnesses. Do they get the same angelic visit, exactly the same as the three witnesses, or how does that one work?
Don't. So they don't. They do get to be witnesses of the plates. So they handle the plates, and they can turn the pages of the plates, but the angel does not appear to those men. That is the main difference between the two sets, I guess, the two sets of witnesses. But those other men get to handle the plates, and it's an incredible experience for them as well.
That would be an incredible experience. So then there's the testimony of the eight. There's Joseph Smith's testimony, which you should definitely go and read. I mean, it's a big one, but it's powerful. He talks about the importance of the Book of Mormon and the brief explanation of the things that we've talked about. Yeah, and it's an incredible experience to have this book and to know of this book and to know about how it came about. And I think it's one of those things that, for us to understand how it came about, helps us more appreciate the doctrine that it has inside of it.
I think so. I think so, and it really, for me personally, it helps my testimony when I learn more about these people. I mean, we've both read a lot. We've got lots of books about this era, and I think giving them, understanding them as people, helps me in terms of that they were real people and they had real struggles, and they all witnessed that the Book of Mormon is the real deal.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it was a different time back then, and not everybody stayed with the church, but nearly everybody came back. In fact, I believe it was only David Whitmer that didn't come back out of all the witnesses.
Yep. So that they're again a Doctrine and Covenants topic, but certainly for various reasons, different witnesses fell away from the church at different times. Lots went back, but David Whitmer never went back to the church after he left the church. But the incredible thing about David Whitmer, and something that I wouldn't mind just finishing on for today's episode, is his deathbed testimony. And I've got a bunch of deathbed testimonies from lots of people of the early church, but David Whitmer's one is pretty good. He has this. David Whitmer doesn't die till really late in the 1800s, and so lots of people can talk to him. He has journalists that talk to him, and he gets lots of opportunity to give his testimony about the church. And at no time ever does David say anything to the contrary. He always backs the church, and he always gives his testimony of the divinity. And this is given 3 days before he dies. So he dies on the 25th of January in 1888. And on the 22nd, so 3 days earlier, David wants to give his testimony. And he does so with a doctor, and he essentially says to his doctor that he wants to speak, and can the doctor confirm that he's still okay to do so, and that he's not a madman. And the doctor says that he thinks he's right. The doctor's been having conversations with David, and David's more than qualified to speak for himself in a sound mind. So he finishes with this testimony. Now, you must all be faithful in Christ. I want to say to you all that the Bible and the record of the Nephites are true, so you can say that you have heard me bear my testimony on my deathbed. All be faithful in Christ, and your reward will be according to your works. God bless you all. My trust is in Christ forever, worlds without end. Amen.
Wow. Powerful testimony. That's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, we'll probably end it there, I'd say. I think it's been great to do our first one. It's been a long time coming, but it's awesome that we've been able to put it together, and we really hope that it will companion you. It's certainly not to replace anything, but this is hopefully a companion to you as you go through your Come Follow Me journey, and it can just help round your education as well. So I hope you've enjoyed yourselves, and we hope you've learnt something. And definitely head over to our website if you want to teach with any of the material that we've spoken about. You'll be able to get our references there, and you'll be able to use some of that material in your own classes, or even bring it up in your classes as well.
Well, thank you for listening to us today, and we'll see you next time.